us to pay homage to him.
We have always been the prize because we have always had and still have something that other people won't, think they can't do without, and don't care to pay for. Because we have always been the prize, we have been under siege for over 3,000 years. Nothing that ever brought into Africa from the outside was meant to do the Africans any good.
She made me to know my history, to know my roots. So I grew up with a love for myself and secure within myself, never feeling inferior and certainly not feeling superior, but that chip on the shoulder that the young lady spoke about is my self-assurance, my confidence, my ability to speak the truth without fear. I don't bend when I don't have to. I don't scratch where I don't itch. I look white people in the eye and speak honestly and truthfully and candidly and unhypocritically to you. That's not a chip. That's just self-assurance that comes from self-knowledge. Teach your children that, and whether we are here or there, we'll be able to make a future for ourselves.
Who are you? You don't know. Don't tell me Negro, that's nothing. What were you before the white man named you a Negro? And where were you? And what did you have? What was yours? What language did you speak then? What was your name? It couldn't have been Smith or Jones or Bunch or Powell. That wasn't your name. They don't have those kind of names where you and I came from. No, what was your name? And why don't you now know what your name was then? Where did it go? Where did you lose it? Who took it? And how did he take it? What tongue did you speak? How did the man take your tongue? Where is your history? How did the man wipe out your history? What did the man do to make you as dumb as you are right now?
In fact, recently, some lot of garbage is written in books by people who call themselves historians, make them pay as if we have to thank Lyndon Baines Johnson for the advancement because he signed the Civil Rights Bill. Of course he signed it, but while he was signing it, we were in the streets burning the country down. You better hurry up and sign it. Burn the whole country down. Do it quick. But if you're not careful, you will thank Lyndon Baines Johnson.
I say, now, give us that poetry on number 7. He wanted to go to heaven, so I took him in 7. You took him in 7. I am the king of the world. Hold it. Hold it. You're not that crazy. I'm a bad man. Wait. I shook up the world. I shook up the world.
So we always say in the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary.
Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Melanated Power Hour. I'm your host, Sam Polk Jr., and I'm so thankful to have you back with us once again as we discuss issues pertinent to the African diaspora. And once again, for those who are new to the show, the African diaspora is anywhere that black people may be, whether it be Nashville, Tennessee, Jackson, Mississippi, Haiti, Puerto Rico, you name it. We recognize those places as our homes away from home, but we also recognize the fact that we are indeed African, and the continent of Africa is our home indeed. I am joined again by the man, the myth, the legend, the funniest man I know, comedian Just Will. What say you, my brother?
Oh, nothing much, brother. I'm just happy to be in the room with you, man, and ready to learn some of this great knowledge you finna drop on us. Because I don't know a lot about the subject that you're talking about tonight, but you allowed me to read the letter before we got on the air, so
yes, sir.
I'm looking forward to seeing what this is all about.
Yes, sir. And we are also joined by a historically minded brother, a scholar in his own right, the administrator, JC, host of Wake Up. What say you, my brother?
Hey, brother, I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to join you. This is actually something that I've been wanting to do.
Yes, sir.
You know, I listen to you, and like Brother Will say, I learn a lot.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. And likewise, I listen to you and I learn a lot. You have a lot of insightful wisdom to impart, and we appreciate you for it. And whenever you get a chance to sit down with like-minded individuals and discuss issues is always a good time for me.
Gratitude.
Yes, sir.
Gratitude.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The subject that we are going to talk about today, brothers, is the Willie Lynch letter. And I'm pretty sure the type of audience that we have has heard it, has read it, or at least are aware of it. I want this show to be twofold. One reason is the purpose of this show is to inform, enlighten members of the diaspora who do not have access to academia, if that makes sense. Twofold, I want professors, I want scholars, I want researchers to give me a pat on the back and say, job well done. But if I was talking to them, it's just a waste of time. It's preaching to the choir. I want to reach that brother or that sister who does not have availability to this information. That's my role. Outside of the ivory tower or the classroom, I want to inform and enlighten and educate that brother or that sister that deserves it too, but just doesn't have access to it.
Also.
Yes, sir. Twofold look at the Willie Lynch letter. We want to read it. We want to discuss its merits, the tenets of it. And then secondly, I want to discuss something that people aren't so familiar with as a drawback from the Willie Lynch letter. A lot of people who are listening are familiar with Willie Lynch syndrome. And what Willie Lynch syndrome is, it is the aftermath or the effects of what Mr. Lynch discusses in his letter. And we're going to draw parallels to it. But Willie Lynch syndrome is a totally different phenomenon that I think is even more dangerous and diabolical than what Mr. Lynch lays out as a plan to control slaves for the next 300 years, if that makes sense. So, Brother Brown, if you don't mind, for the benefit of people who have not heard it, I want you to read the first 8 paragraphs of the Willie Lynch letter, and keep in mind that Lynch goes into greater detail about how to do the things that he is mentioning in the letter, but most people stop after the first 8 paragraphs. So we're going to discuss that, and it's too much for you to read if we were to do it all, but I'm going to interject the second time we look at it.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get it started, man.
Yes, sir.
The Willie Lynch letter, The Making of a Slave. Gentlemen, I greet you here on the banks of the James River in the year of our Lord, 1712. First, I should thank you, the gentlemen of the colony of Virginia, for bringing me here. I am here to help you solve some of your problems with slaves. Your invitation reached me on the modest plantation in the West Indies, where I have experimented with some of the newest and still the oldest methods of controlling the slaves. Ancient Rome would envy us if my program is implemented. As our boat sails south on the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish, I saw enough to know that your problem is not unique. While Rome used cords of wood as crosses for standing human bodies along its highways in great numbers, you are here using trees and ropes on occasions. I caught a whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple of miles back. You're not only losing valuable stock by hangings, you are having uprisings, slaves are running away, your crops are sometimes left in the field too long for maximum profits, you suffer from occasional fires, and your animals are killed. Gentlemen, you know what your problems are. I do not need to elaborate. I am not here to enumerate your problems. I'm here to introduce you to a method of solving them. In my bag here, I have foolproof methods for controlling your black slaves. I guarantee every one of you that you install correctly, it will control the slaves for at least 300 years. My method is simple. Any member of your family or your overseers can use it. I've outlined a number of differences among slaves, and I take these differences and make them bigger. I use fear, distrust, and envy for control purposes. These methods have worked on the modest plantation in the West Indies, and it will work throughout the South. Take this simple little list of differences and think about them. On top of my list is age, but it's there only because it starts with an A. The second is color or shade. There's intelligence, size, sex, size of plantation, status of plantation, the attitudes of owners. Whether the slave lives in the valley, on a hill, east, west, north, south, have fine hair, coarse hair, or is tall or short. Now that you have a list of differences, I should give you an outline of action. But before that, I shall assure you that the distrust is stronger than the trust, and the envy is stronger than that. What's that? Adulation? Idolation. My bad. Mm-hmm. Respect or admiration. The black slaves after receiving this indoctrination, my tongue tied up, shall carry on and will become self-refueling and self-generating for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Don't forget, you must pitch the old black male versus the young black male, and the young black male against the old black male. You must use the dark-skinned slave versus the light-skinned slave, and the light-skinned slave versus the dark-skinned slave. You must use the female versus the male, and the male versus the female. You must also have white servants and overseers who distrust all blacks. But it's necessary that your slaves trust and depend on us. They must love, respect, and trust only us. Gentlemen, these kids are your keys to control. Use them. Have your wives and children use them. Never miss an opportunity. If used intensely for 1 year, the slaves themselves will remain, perpetually and distrustfully. Thank you, gentlemen.
Now, when I first heard that in 1995 at the Million Man March, it blew my mind. Because at that time, in an 8-paragraph letter, it simplified the problems of the black community. And almost in a second, everything made sense. Now, Brother Brown, what are the key points of that letter you can point out that can explain some of the things that we go through now?
Well, you mean like some of the things that stuck out to me? The dark-skinned male versus the light-skinned male, Absolutely. The male versus the woman, yes. The old versus the young, all that stuff is pretty much going on now.
It's pertinent to us as a society today.
Right.
Brother JC, what are some of the main points of that letter that struck you when you first heard it?
When I first heard it, it was definitely the ones that Brother Will mentioned, you know, because of the whole old male, young male.
Yes, sir.
Light versus dark, male versus female. And that just, it took me back. I was like, wow.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because those was like the ingredients of the issues that we're going through.
We're still facing them. We have issues in the African American community regarding colorism, light-skinned people feeling that they are, for some reason, better than darker skin. Darker skinned brothers and sisters having an issue with lighter skinned people because they feel that they think that they're better. We have issues where the youth do not revere their elders any longer.
Right.
We have issues of male versus female. There's a class struggle within the African American community. It would seem where it's almost like we aren't a team. We aren't in it together. Your success means my detriment.
Right.
Or if a female is deservingly given a position over a male feels a certain kind of way.
Right.
This letter gives reason for why we feel like that or why we go through this. A young lady who has a male son who is naturally masculine and wants to stand out and defend and provide for is sometimes relegated to almost an Americanized vision of what a daughter would be, because she fears for his safety, because she knows what happens to male quote-unquote slaves that step out a little
Right.
bit.
Masculine male.
Absolutely. They
Right.
get punished the most severest.
Right.
So we see all of this come into play. All of that is great. I suggest, and to add some context, I first heard this letter in 1995. And I think you told me you first heard it in 1992.
Yes,
And I
sir.
first heard it today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That makes perfect sense into where I'm about to go.
Okay.
I want everybody that's listening that knows where I'm about to go just to be patient, and just hold what you got. I want people who believe and take this letter literally to be patient and just hear me out. I want you to, when I'm finished, look at this letter in a totally different way. Look at it in a scholarly way and not an emotional one.
Right.
Because when your emotions take over, you're in trouble because you make the worst decisions.
Is this going to be one of those aha moments at the end?
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope. It depends on the kind of job I do, but I believe I can do it.
All right.
We all know that Santa isn't real.
Correct.
But at one time, we believed he was real.
Right.
Correct.
Devoid of any research, we just took for granted that he was real based on authority figures telling us that he was.
Right.
Now, I want to discuss something that is rarely discussed outside of academia. Those who are into African American studies, African diasporic studies from the university standpoint, already know where I'm going. But the brother outside of that, the sister outside of that, who is my mission to reach, hasn't even thought about this, right? And it's not their fault.
Right.
When you look at historical context, the first thing you have to do is remove emotion. Historical context allows you to be able to read time. And what reading time is, understanding that what you are reading, you cannot apply today's thoughts and thinking to what you're reading if what you're reading was historically supposed to have happened 200-300 years ago. You can't do that. If you do not know how to read time, you don't know that the 1800s is the 19th century. You will believe that you're getting these things conflated or convoluted, or this doesn't make sense. He said it was the 1800s. Right, the 1800s is the 1900s. But if you can't read time, you don't know that. If you don't know that AD time, centuries and years are different. BC time, centuries and years are the same. That's one of the reasons why they had to correct it, because they messed up at first. They didn't count the zero. So really they were off a year. So you end up being off a century. If you don't know what a decade, a century, an eon, an epoch, a millennium, it's just as important historically when looking at a context as week, month, second, minute, right? I'm going to point out some historical inconsistencies with this letter that the writer of it, who I believe had good intentions, that should give you a hint that Willie Lynch didn't write this. The author of it had good intentions, but the road to hell can be paved with good intentions.
That's right.
And if you don't look at something historically rather than emotionally, it can cause something totally unwarranted, or it wasn't your initial intention. The Willie Lynch syndrome that we all know, which this letter explains, would seem to be a real thing to us. And it is real because we're going through it, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, what it has caused is Willie Lynch syndrome, which I think is of great detriment to us. So what I want to do is take the good points of this letter in explaining our situation, or helping a youngster understand why we go through what we go through. And once we've done that, I want to look at the letter in a scholarly way, and I want to take Mr. Willie Lynch and give him a soldier's burial. And when we bury Mr. Lynch, we'll never repeat his name again, because it has become something that has gotten totally out of hand. and we misconstrue. All right, Brother Brown, if you don't mind, read the letter again, start from the beginning, the little introduction that comes with the letter, and don't get offended when I say stop.
All right.
And then just pick up where I told you to stop, okay?
Gotcha. Willie Lynch letter, The Making of a Slave. The following is an introduction to a speech said to have been delivered by Willie Lynch on the bank of the James River in the colony of Virginia in 1712. Lynch is said to have been a British slave owner in the West Indies. He was invited to the colony of Virginia in 1712 to teach the methods to the owners of enslaved Africans there. Gentlemen.
Stop right there.
All right.
Willie Lynch, if you look for him historically in the tons of books and periodicals and documents, not only that have been collected over the years, but of that time, you will not find Mr. Willie Lynch mentioned. It says that he's a British man. Remember that. And he comes from the West Indies. To us, that makes sense, and it flies over our head without much scrutiny, right? To a historian, red flags already. If you tell me you from the West Indies, where? The West Indies could be Jamaica. Right. It could be Haiti, Barbados, Puerto Rico, St. Nevis, St. Kitts, on and on, Cuba, on and on, right? Where in the West Indies is he from? Okay? Now, we're talking about the 1712. This is the 18th century, right? Mm-hmm. Start back again, Brother Brown, from the beginning. Gentlemen,
I greet you here on the bank of James River in the year of our Lord.
Stop right there. He greeting these people who have brought him at great expense from the West Indies all the way to Virginia, right? Mm-hmm. 18th century decorum demands a better introduction than that. Even today, you know, if you go in to hear a lecture and there's many dignitaries on the stage, it's going to be about an hour before he get to his speech. He got to thank the person that brought him. He got to thank the host. If the host's family up there, he's going to say a few words about his wife, his 3 children. You know, he just starts out gentleman. It doesn't make historical sense in terms of the decorum or the proper way that a gentleman out of the Victorian age would start a speech, if that makes sense. Right. Go ahead, Brother Brown.
First, I should thank you, the gentleman of the colony of Virginia, for bringing me here. I'm here to help you solve a problem. I'm here to help you solve your problem with slaves. Your invitation reached me on a modest plantation in the West Indies where I have experimented with some of the newest and still oldest methods of controlling slaves. Ancient Rome would envy us if my program is implemented. As our boat sails south from the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish.
Stop right there. Who is he referring to? What king is he referring to?
King James.
King James, mm-hmm. the author of the version of the Bible that we read.
Right.
King James has been dead for 100 years. Mm-hmm. He would have, if he was real, given a real public speech, not have said anything before he mentioned the current monarch of Britain, who was Queen Anne. She was one of the figures key in creating Great Britain, the acquisition of Ireland, Scotland, India, and so forth. Why does he not mention the current monarch? Why would he mention a monarch from 100 years past? Right. You understand what I'm saying? These are things that would make a historian hair stand up. There's something suspicious about this. We're not talking about the merits of the letter. Right. We're just talking about having this figure be deified by suggesting that he was real. Right. You understand what I mean? If this makes sense, go ahead, Brother Brown.
I saw enough to know that your problem is not unique. While Rome used the cords and woods as a cross for standing human bodies along its highways in great numbers, you are here using trees and ropes on occasion. I caught a whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple of miles back. You are not you are not losing valuable stocks by hangings. You are having uprisings, slaves are running away. Your crops are sometimes left in the field too long for maximum profits. You suffer occasional fires. Your animals are killed.
Stop right there. He says that on his way to the banks of the James River, he saw a slave hanging from a tree.
Yeah.
This has led many people to say this is the reason we say lynching. Lynching was actually derived from Willie Lynch's name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, what's the most famous case of lynching in the United States history? It happened to a member of our community around the 1950s. The most famous lynching case that actually is given credit for spurring on the civil rights movement. The lynching of Emmett Till.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me ask you another question, Brother Brown.
Okay.
What is lynching?
From what I think, I guess it's just hanging from a tree.
No. Lynching is exacting mob violence, where a group of people who feel like justice hasn't been served goes out, takes the person who they feel is guilty, which hadn't been proven in the court of law, and killing him. Was Emmett Till hung?
No.
Was a rope used at all?
Not that.
He was beaten to death,
Right.
mutilated, and thrown in a river.
Right.
That's lynching. Now, we have internalized that hanging from a tree means lynching.
Right.
Now, historically, we are talking about the 1712. This is the 1800s. Do you know when lynching became a phenomenon in terms of us as an African-American community? After the Civil War.
Okay.
1865, as mob violence steered toward a black community who they felt had gotten out of their place. In other words, if you as a black man or a black woman did something that the white community did not approve of, a mob would go out and hang you from a tree. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
That form of lynching didn't come into existence until after 1865.
Right.
A slave would not have been hung from a tree. If you got a horse that isn't acting the way that you want it to act, would you kill it? What about your monetary investment in the horse?
Right.
If anything, you just sell it away to somebody else that didn't know he got those kind of issues, right? This is what happened. So we are conflating a modern context onto something historically a couple hundred years prior that didn't even exist. You understand? But if you don't know how to read time or research from a scholarly standpoint, it all mend together. You see what I'm saying? So lynching did not even exist at the time. In fact, we can attribute the word lynching to a man who, it's funny, he was from Virginia. He was a judge. His name is James Lynch. And in the 1800s, he lived in a town that was kind of lawless. He didn't have enough policemen. So he just got tired of it. So when people would do things, he would send out a mob to just go get them and kill them. You know, to bring them to justice, as he called it. That's where we get the term lynching from. His name was Judge James Lynch. And it's not to be attributed to Willie Lynch as those self-appointed philosophers will say. And by the way, this is where we derive the term lynching from Mr. Willie Lynch. You understand what I'm saying? Keep going, my brother. Hope I ain't making nobody mad.
Gentlemen, you know what your problems are. I do not need to elaborate. I am not here to enumerate your problems. I'm here to introduce you to a method of solving them. In my bag here, I have a foolproof method of controlling your black slaves.
Stop right there. He says in his bag he has a what?
A foolproof method.
Foolproof method does not enter the American lexicon until Albert Einstein talks about his foolproof method. Why would a man in 1712 mention a foolproof method? Right behind foolproof method, pick up, Brother Brown.
For controlling your black slaves.
Stop right there. The term black, as it relates to us as a people, what we call ourselves, what other people call us, does not enter the American lexicon until after 1966. Why? Because Stokely Carmichael gives his famous Black Power speech in Greenwood, Mississippi. After that, we start calling ourselves black. Also, how does he spell the word black?
B-L-A-C-K.
Capital or lowercase?
Capital, all caps.
No slave owner would be as respectful as to capitalize black when talking about his slave.
Right.
He would have said, I got a foolproof method of controlling your niggas. It's the author of this letter obviously has good intentions because he can't even bring himself to be derogatory in a historical context. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
I hope that makes sense. Keep going, Brother Brown.
I guarantee every one of you that if installed correctly, it will control the slaves for at least 300 years.
Stop. Literally spell out how he says 300 years.
300 HUNDREDSYEARS, all caps.
Stop. Why would he say 300 and then 100?
Yeah, okay.
That's a mistake of the author who didn't double check or have somebody proofread what he was writing before he sent it out. You see what I'm saying? These are things that an academician would catch right off. We've all in this room read that letter and didn't think nothing about it.
I sure
You understand what I'm saying? Keep going.
My method is simple. Any member of your family or your overseers can use it. I have outlined a number of differences amongst the slaves, and I take these differences and make them bigger. I use fear, distrust, and envy for control purposes. These methods have worked on my modest plantation in the West Indies, and it will work throughout the South.
Stop. What year are we in?
1712.
Okay. States in the South don't exist.
And
It's 1712. It's the 13 colonies. The states don't come into being until well after 1776, right?
Right.
So there is no concept of a North or a South. This is obviously a modern person who can't divorce himself of modern contextual realities when writing about something in the past, right? The concept of the South doesn't come into being until the early 1800s, when after the Revolutionary War, around 1790s, the North takes on a different direction than the South. And their monetary, I guess, the use of what they used to gain monetary value is slightly different than what the North was. So when traversing between these places, they started to become a clear distinction. Oh, we in the North. Right. I'm seeing industrialization. I'm seeing factories. And the South is still on this agrarian, we making money off the land type thing. This is 18, I say, starts to become prevalent in, I would say, 1820s, right? This is almost 100 years after Mr. Lynch is said to have given his speech, if that makes sense. Right. Go ahead, Brother Brown.
All right, I'm trying to remember where I left off.
The South.
The South. Let's see, where was it at? Okay, I got it. Take this simple little list of differences and think about them. On the top of my list is age, but it's there only because it starts with an A. The second is color or shape.
Stop right there.
Okay.
The first is age, because he's going in alphabetical order. The second one naturally is what?
Color.
Spell color. How does he spell it?
C-O-L-O-R. All caps.
Okay. He's British. How do British people spell color? C-O-L-O-U-R.
Oh.
And color, C-O-L-O-R, the way we spell it, is a corruption of the King's English, which doesn't start to come into place until the 1900s. You understand what I'm saying? No British man, no literate British man would spell the word color without putting that U in there.
Okay.
Now, read the other means of...
Gotcha. There is intelligence, size, sex.
Wait a minute. Keep going.
There is intelligence, size, sex, size of plantations, status of plantations, attitude of owners.
I thought he was going in alphabetical order.
You said you thought he was going in alphabetical. Well, yeah, I guess you're right.
This is a mistake of the author. who doesn't have somebody to proofread him. He's got good intentions. He starts off in alphabetical order, but he doesn't finish in alphabetical order. This would not be something that a Victorian British gentleman would have done speaking to an august body, right?
Right.
Keep going.
Attitudes of owners. What do the slaves live on the what do the slaves live in the valley, on the hill, east, west, north, south?
And by the way, there's no east, west, north, south at this time. It's just the 13 colonies. But go ahead.
Have fine hair, coarse hair, or is tall or short?
Stop right there.
Okay.
Fine hair, coarse hair, tall or short. Now, what about that makes any sense? Just stop. Divorce your emotions from it, from what we think today. What about that makes sense? Why would you divide your slaves according to height? Why would you divide your slaves according to the texture of their hair? This has led us to erroneously make the statements that if you were light-skinned, you were a house slave. If you were dark-skinned, you were a field slave. This creates tension among ourselves that the letter didn't even have an intent on doing. In fact, if you study historically the documentation that is available, and it's tons of it, the average house slave was dark-skinned. Why do you think that is? Because the lighter-skinned slaves were products of the slave master having proximity with slave women, right?
Right.
And the woman of the house didn't want them in there because it was a constant reminder of his infidelity. So that the average lighter-skinned slave was in the field. And she wanted the darkest of the dark you could get, which meant that this, at least I ain't got to see what you be doing when I ain't around. You understand what I'm saying? I'm going to read something for you real quick. And this is from Dr. William Pearson, former professor of history from Fisk University. He's commenting on the Willie Lynch letter, right? This is right out of one of his syllabuses.
Okay.
Willie Lynch, his old versus young and dark versus light divisions would be most peculiar among early 18th century African Americans in both the West Indies and Virginia, who did not have such color gradations as of yet. In their own time, they would have maintained no or near no absolute African hold on. I'm trying to read my own writing. No, in other words, they wouldn't have differentiated each other by the base of color context, because the way we look now is not the way we looked then.
Right.
A lot of these differences in hair, grade, and skin tone hadn't, in a physical standpoint, started to develop yet. Right? You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And two, on age, there's an African tradition, right? That we are to respect our elders. What you do is you diminish the resistance that we had towards slavery by taking everything literal in the Willie Lynch letter. In other words, we fought back at every possible turn. You understand what I'm saying? We talked about libation and respecting your elders. Brother Brown, when you were a child, were you allowed to disrespect your elders?
Hell no.
Okay, according to this letter, we should have been doing so for about 400 years now. I know I couldn't. If you wanted to get hit with a shoe or slapped upside your head with a sugar cane or something, disrespecting an elder, that's a big no-no.
Right.
That is a total Africanism that we carry from our time on the continent. What we are confusing are the American value systems that perpetuate this letter. You see what I'm saying? And because young people disrespect their elders now, when we read something that was supposedly written 200 years ago, or 300 years ago, we attribute or we take for granted that those same things happened then. You understand what I'm saying? Keep going.
All right, let me see what I picked up at. status of plantation, attitude of owners, whether the slaves live in valley, on a hill, east, west, north, or south, have fine hair, coarse hair, or is tall or short. Now that you have a list of differences, I should give you an outline of action. But before that, I shall assure you that distrust is stronger than trust, and envy stronger than adulation, respect, or admiration. The black slaves who are receiving this indoctrination shall carry on and will become self-refueling and self-generating.
Stop right there.
Okay.
Self-refueling. The word fuel does not enter the American lexicon until transportation takes on this modern context. In other words, the first thing that we ever made reference to having to fuel was a train. Trains weren't invented until 1805 or 1804, one of those two. Okay. And you would have to refuel a train. Right behind self-generating. That denotes electricity. When you can self-generate something fails, something picks up and keeps it going, right? Fuel or refueling is attributed to a vehicle of some sort. The train, the automobile, the truck, none of that stuff existed in 1712. It's totally out of historical context. You see what I'm saying? He would not have made mention to refueling anything or self-generating anything. You see what I'm saying? But keep going.
For hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Don't forget.
By the way, isn't it convenient that he said this will work for 300 years? Now, if he's giving that speech in 1712, it just kind of, isn't it ironic that it just brings us to right now? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
See, if he gave that speech in 1712 and you first heard it in 1995 or 2012, you like, be damn. It didn't work. You see what I'm saying? The author of the letter is taking that into account. You see what I'm saying? He's hitting every emotional tie. King James, we mostly Christian. We in it. Lynching, we know what lynching is, as our experience has been through Jim Crow and all that strikes a chord, that's sensitive with us. He's hitting all of these, sexism, classism, racism, within our own ranks. All you got to do is watch School Days. You'll see all of it played out, right? Keep going.
Don't forget, you must pitch the old black male versus the young black male. The young black male against the old black male. You must use the dark-skinned slaves versus the light-skinned slaves, and the light-skinned slaves versus the dark-skinned slaves. You must use the female versus the male, and the male versus the female. You must also have white servants and overseers who distrust all blacks. But it is necessary that your slaves trust and depend on us. They must love, respect, and trust only us. Gentlemen, these kids are your keys to control. Use them. Have your wives and children use them. Never miss an opportunity. If used intensely for 1 year, these slaves themselves will remain perpetually distrustful. Thank you, gentlemen.
That last section that you read is a totally 20th century American value system driven way of looking at things, right? The slave did not disrespect their elders or distrust their elder. The slave did not make a distinction between color shade or hair gradation. These are modern realities that a modern man or woman is putting into a letter to get you to understand something, right? What does make sense is that I can say the first time I heard the Willie Lynch letter was at the Million Man March. Pretty soon after that, I heard it from some good brothers that I know very well in college. Now, I'm not knocking the merits of the letter because it can, in a very simple fashion, get people who were beforehand totally erroneous to why we act the way we act. It can make it make sense. These are good things, right? But I'm not saying we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But what I want to do is eliminate a reality that has come from us believing this literally. Brother JC, you said you heard it
in 92.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. everybody that I asked, when was the first time you heard it? It's somewhere in the mid to early 1990s, right? Mm-hmm. You know why that it is?
What is that?
The first time it appears is 1990.
Okay.
There's a lady named Ann Taylor. She's a librarian at the University of Missouri at St. Louis. Somebody gets her this letter and just leaves it anonymous. She reads it. She's floored. She posts it. Before really research, she posts it on their reference section.
Okay.
Then after posting it, she consults revered black historians around the country. And they have a very different take on it than she had when she first read it. And she's a professional. She's a librarian, right? Mm-hmm. She was forced to come back after posting it, and this is what it reads. University of Missouri at St. Louis, Thomas Jefferson Library Reference Department. Provenance of the following text is unclear. This speech was purportedly given by a slave owner named William Lynch on the banks of the James River in 1712. Analysis, however, suggests that this document is a forgery, written somewhere in between the mid and late 20th century. If you have further information about the origins of this narrative, please consult the contact information below. This is very important because one of our most revered historians, a man who said, I only debate my peers, everyone else I teach, Dr. John Henry Clark, was one of the first people she sent this letter to for his opinion.
Right.
Dr. John Henry Clark is said to have not been able to get through the first 2 paragraphs before he filed it away and filed 13. Right. And if you don't know, and if you don't understand academic talk, that's the trash can. One of the other ones was the brother I just read to you, Dr. William Pearson from Fisk University. Mm-hmm. He says that a lot of these things make sense to the layperson, but in historical context, it is not valid, right. And so on and so on. But in 1993, the second she pushed send, it's too late. Mm. It takes the internet by storm. And from 1990 to 1992, it makes its way to your ears. Mm-hmm. It makes its way to my ears by way of the Million Man March. It makes its way to the great debaters, Denzel Washington mentioning it in the movie. And before you know it, it's an urban legend that is no longer a legend, it's reality, right? And it creates what I call the Willie Lynch syndrome, meaning that if I'm talking to a group of teenagers and I ask them who in here has heard of Willie Lynch, every hand will raise and every child there will be able to intelligently explain who Willie Lynch is and why he's famous. Then I ask them who is Carter G. Woodson, and they don't know. Then I ask them who is Mary McLeod Bethune, and they don't know. We have deified by proxy Mr. Willie Lynch and made him an infallible, almost God-like manifestation who, without him, in this 8-paragraph document, we wouldn't know why we're going through what we're going through. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
This is a big problem. Anybody that knows this from academia can relate to me saying it's hard to explain this to most people because Willie Lynch syndrome will attack you.
Right.
And when explaining this, I've heard everything from, you don't know what the hell you talk about. What you mean the Willie Lynch letter ain't real? Mm-hmm. What you mean the Willie Lynch wasn't real? You ain't real with your fake ass. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
On and on.
Lashing out.
Yeah. So to draw a scenario, your child, before it is before it has he or she has the cognitive ability to question things and to notice, hey man, something just like Dr. John Henry Clark could look at this in 2 paragraphs and say, hey man, this something ain't right about this is fishy. And then it get to the point where he just say just fake, I'm throwing it away, it ain't even worth reading. As a child, when you're told about Santa Claus, you automatically take it as fact because it's coming from an authority figure.
Right.
Once you get old enough to start to question, hey, Daddy, how did Santa Claus get in the house? The chimney. We ain't got no chimney. Well, he knocked on the door and I answered it. No, you didn't. You was snoring all night. So how did these presents get? If you ask too many questions now, the authority figure may get a little angry at why you just believe it. You know what I'm saying? And the attack becomes on the child instead of applauding it. Very good, little Johnny. Very good, little princess. You was able to pick it. You know, he's not real. Right. The person who doesn't have that ability to do it, you become the truth, or the historical basis becomes the brunt of attack. Instead of a man who, if he is real, shouldn't we be attacking this?
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? It also gives many of us the excuse to continue to do things that are detrimental to ourselves and the community. Well, you know, it's Willie Lynch. You know, I've even heard Kanye West say on the song, what did he say? Oh man, I shouldn't even brought it up because I can't remember the lyric. But he was like, he was doing something that he knew was terrible, but I'm doing it because, you know, it's Willie Lynch syndrome. You know, you understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So I'm gonna do it anyway.
Right.
Or, you know, we not gonna be able to unite because, you know, Willie Lynch syndrome just got us all. So we don't even try. Right. What you don't understand is, in this modern context, are black people the only people who have problems between the sexes? Are we the only ones?
No.
Are we the only ones who have jealousy between tall and short, and light and dark?
Right.
There was a professor. I can't remember his name. Stephen Williams, I think it was. He said they were invited to a meeting of young Jewish students when he was in school and young Korean students. And the day before they were having their Pan-Africanist meeting, they couldn't agree on anything. And at a certain point, they just attributed it to Willie Lynch and agreed to disagree.
Right.
Taking that invitation on, they get into this meeting with this group of Jewish students and this group of Korean students. When they entered into the meeting, the Jewish students were having an argument about how they should proceed with the meeting. Then the Koreans started having an argument about, no, we should do it like this. And one of the Koreans stood up and said, man, how come we can't just unite like the black folks? You see what I'm saying? Right. These are universal problems that are playing out from an American context, American value system. If you continue to read because he goes in greater detail. Another fishy part is the part where he goes into greater detail doesn't make its way to Ann Taylor, the librarian. These come much later. We're still trying to track down where these came from, but if they were attributed to Willie Lynch, why didn't they come with the letter? You see what I'm saying? Right. There's a part where it's saying before the breaking process, we had to be on our guards at all times. If he will become a good tool, now ready to be tied to the horse at a tender age. By the time a nigger, using the proper context now, because the author has heard all this stuff from scholars that black wouldn't have been. So now when he brings out this second part, niggers in there, right? Reaches the age of 16. He is soundly broken and ready for life's sound, efficient work. And then it goes into how you use the female and reverse the roles. Give her the role of the male. Give the male the role of the female. The male will remain strong and can work, but will not do anything without his woman telling him to. And she would tell him to do whatever the slave master see. You make the woman independent. This is a modern context. Right. If you know anything about African history, you know we have always revered our women, so much so that a pharaoh would never even issue the building of a statue of himself without putting his woman right there.
That's right.
And in his absence, he didn't hand over control to a vice president. He handed it to his queen.
Right.
We've never had that issue from an African standpoint.
Right.
The letter also denotes that there's something wrong with a black woman being independent. You see what I'm saying? Why would independence be a problem if it was being exercised by a black woman? If you have a daughter, you should have an issue with that. You shouldn't want your daughter to be beholden to a man for her sustenance or her well-being.
Exactly.
hey, that could be an issue for another show as we get into the reasons for a certain thing being the first career choice or the first, what do they call it? The first job was what? Prostitution.
Right.
You see
say
what
the
I'm
oldest
profession. Right,
yeah.
exactly. So, so when we make an analysis of his letter, there's a lot of problems that we take on as access baggage that shouldn't even be there in the first place.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
As an introduction, this letter can be a great tool of breaking the ice. Hey, brother, the reason y'all arguing, I want you to read something. And it'll start to make sense. Now, let's start to remove the falsities from the truth, because the truth can stand by itself, right? Yeah. Any clinical psychologist will tell you if you're trying to fix a problem with a myth, you'll never fix it because it was never, the truth of it was never addressed. You understand what I'm saying? Right. Willie Lynch, if he were real and he were able to sustain slavery for 400 years or 300 years, and not only that, but after slavery, get us to continue to act in such a fashion that white people can control us, he would have been on currency before George Washington. He would have been on the $1 bill. Right. Or at least, in retrospect, somebody would have had him on the $4 bill or the $7 bill. Right. We have great, let's just talk about the black scholars. Frederick Douglass, Alexander Crummell, Martin R. Delaney, who's probably the father of Pan-Africanist thought. None of them mention him. Right. Why wouldn't they mention this man? Thomas Jefferson, who was one of the biggest proponents of slavery and how to maintain a slave breeding farm, why wouldn't he have mentioned him? He would have been the Einstein of this field of study, right? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this man named Paul Finkelstein. He is a great researcher and scholar. I use great in quotations. I'm not anybody who knows who that is. I'm not saying he's a great man the way you're thinking about it, but great can also denote big, right? A great disaster, the great flood. It wasn't good. It was big. Right. He is a great researcher, par excellence, right? And the thing about him, the reason I gave you that caveat is because he is a pro-slavery guy in a modern day time, believe it or not. He has written tons of books defending slavery and why slavery is good. One of the best ones that you can get for a historical reference of primary sources, first-hand accounts, empirical data, is a book that he wrote called Defending Slavery, Pro-Slavery Thought in the Old South, A Brief History with Documents. And this book was written by Paul Finkelstein in 2003. Every known sermon that was given by a preacher preaching the benefits of slavery and why slavery should exist, why God wants slavery. Every newspaper article of anybody ever giving a speech about why you need to do slavery and why you need to maintain it, Willie Lynch's name ain't mentioned in none of that.
None of it.
Where did he come from? How did they know to send for him? There ain't no telephone books, you know. And if he just lives in the West Indies, where would you have even began to look for him? You understand what I'm saying? If you got one of the most monumental speeches of that time period given, and no more information about actually, that would be a tourist attraction. Especially for these Donald Trump types, right? They will be having rallies there. You just say he gave the speech on the banks of the James River. Well, I could tell you, JC, meet me on the banks of the Mississippi River. You might be in Biloxi and I'm in Minnesota. That's how far the river goes.
Exactly.
The James River traverses 9 counties. You understand? Why can't we go document where this was? You understand? And when you bring these points up, people will argue, well, it was the 1712. They didn't know to document all that. That denotes a lack of historical understanding. In that time period, written documents are way more detailed than they are now. They don't have tape recorders.
Exactly.
They can't rely on video cameras. They write the most minutest detail, and too many of them are missing, right? Now, the argument is still, well, it seems like this isn't real, right? I'm about to drive to stake in the vampire's heart, okay? There is a great scholar, professor in California named Manu Pim, and he has a book called Death of the Willie Lynch Speech, Exposing the Myth. I'm going to put him up in a minute. Mr. Pim has written tons of literature on the Willie Lynch letter, right, and how fake it is. He gets attacked. He's not attacking the merits of this. This is a incredible work of literature. The prose is beautiful. It can get you to understand a complex thing very quickly because it's so simple and concise, right?
Right.
But as John Henry Clark, as Dr. Williams, as a historian, as a researcher, when he read it, all of the historical inconsistencies it was like scratching on the chalkboard, so he had to keep looking into it. He's also an investigator. You'll appreciate that. He knows how to read people. He can also read documentation. He said initially in the 90s, around the time the letter first surfaced, that the person who wrote this is somewhere in between his 20s and his 30s. He wrote it somewhere in the 1970s. He's profiling the guy. He said, number one, somebody in their 40s or 50s would have had way better things to do with their time. Second thing, it's not a teenager because he has a little nuance. He knows about the colonies. He knows about Thomas Jefferson. King James. He can throw these in there because he's using what he knows.
Right.
But he doesn't have a grasp of historical context, so he makes mistakes. He also is young because in the grammatical errors I pointed out, he didn't have the wisdom to consult. You should have somebody read anything you write if you're finna put it out to the public, because they can catch things that you didn't see firsthand, even sometimes after you proofread. And he points this out in 2003, right? And he's approached by Paul Coates. For those who don't know who Paul Coates is, he is the owner of Black Classic Press. And he's also the father of Ta-Nehisi Coates. He was approached at a conference by Paul Coates to put this in book form, and he did. And once he put it in book form, the first edition, he gets an email. Let me read you the email. Hope I ain't boring nobody. This is your brother, Dr. K.F. Asante. That's the introduction. Here in Durham, North Carolina, I am confiding in you, brother, with confidence until I have finished my third edition of my second book. You can say, however, that you are exactly right. You got me. I am the author of the Willie Lynch letter. He does him that favor, and he doesn't reveal this to the public, because the young man in 1976 who initially wrote this letter for a group of students in a study group who could not understand why they was having, in a modern time, problems dealing with sexism, racism, why women, black men and black women couldn't get along, couldn't stay married, why the light skin and the dark skin were having these conflicts based on color context like other people had with classism.
Right.
And so not being able to have access to bookstores, like he would explain later, sometimes when we couldn't find a book to explain a point scholarly, we just made some shit up. So he made this letter up to get them to understand why they were going through what they were going through. Keep in mind, these are fellow students, so they understand that the letter is not to be taken literally. Right. Sort of like reading Bible verses. Right. Some people believe Noah really built the ark and put every damn animal in the world on it. Some people know that's not to be taken literally. Right. You're supposed to subtract. You're supposed to extract the lesson from it.
Right.
They understood that. However, it was so mind-blowing. It blew their minds the same as it blew mine, blew yours in the 90s, blew Will when he just read it. They took it home and shared it with their parents. They shared it with their siblings, who shared it with 3 people, who shared it with 6 people, who shared it with 1,000 people. And in 1976, no internet, it took about 20 years to become an urban legend. Fast forward to the 90s. Now Farrakhan is saying it. Now at the Million Man March. Now Denzel is saying it. And with the rise of the internet, this new iteration, these new generations with their smartphones have discovered it by way of the internet. You see what I'm saying? And it is taking on a life of itself.
Right.
Dr. Asante did not have malice intent. He was trying to use myth, as we have always done in an African tradition, to get a lesson across to students who knew how to extract the lesson.
The lesson.
Right.
Anansi.
Yes, sir. if this makes sense.
It does.
So my issue with the letter is not the good deeds that it can do in helping someone who's having trouble explaining to a young brother or a young sister the dilemmas we face in a modern context. I however, want to kill Willie Lynch a natural death and bury him and not mention him ever again. Because you shouldn't be able to tell me anything about Willie Lynch if you can't tell me who Carter G. Woodson is.
Exactly.
You shouldn't be able to tell me about, I shouldn't have to defend myself personally when I point these historical inaccuracies out without you coming to the defense of the quote-unquote biggest detriment to us as a people.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
He has been deified.
A type of Stockholm syndrome.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Now, Dr. Asante has retired, but for years he was a professor. This is the author of the real Willie Lynch letter. He was a professor in Durham, North Carolina State University. His field is psychology. And he specializes, can't make this shit up, he specializes in brainwashing. He implemented things. Now, he was a student at the time he wrote it, but he's a master. He trains people on how to brainwash people. That's what he does. He implemented things in that letter that had brainwashing qualities. You make an emotional appeal. All you got to do is name him Willie Lynch. First of all, I've never met a white man named Willie. But you just put Lynch in his name, you automatically got the those who have gone through the African-American experience. I don't care where you hear the word Lynch, it make you look up, right? Because that's been our experience here. All you got to do is mention King James. Even though he hadn't been the monarch for 100 years, that ain't the king. Would you mention, if you were discussing the presidential debate a couple weeks ago, would you mention Abraham Lincoln? It has no historical significance there, right? So he does all these things. He knows that we having issues between the sexes. He puts that in there. He knows we're having issues between, in his modern context, the young and the old. He puts that in there. And he draws you in. But he's trying to draw the people he initially wrote that for so they can understand. And sometimes hypnotism is warranted in getting you to understand something that you can't quite wrap your head around, right? It's too big. But to give the credit for our understanding what we know to this one white man that came to the banks of the James River and spoke for 8 minutes, and we wouldn't know why we go through what we go through if it weren't for him. Deifies him.
Right.
And there's certain people that, as a scholar, you know, when you're at work, you don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics.
Right.
As a scholar, when speaking to laymen, you can't be critical of Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, or Willie Lynch, or they coming to get you. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So that's just my contribution to getting us to understand this letter. And instead of arguing the tenets of whether Noah really built an ark, take the lesson from it. Instead of arguing the tenets of whether a great fish or whale really swallowed Jonah, take the lesson from it. You understand? So let's take the lesson from a beautiful piece of literature written by Dr. Asante and put Willie Lynch away with, King Arthur and Santa Claus and Peter Parker and all those other people. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
They use that even in comic books.
Peter Parker's real.
They use real things to draw you in. Like they'll tell you he lives in New York. New York's a real place, but Peter Parker ain't real. You know what I'm saying? Spider-Man ain't real. But any thoughts on that, my brother? I know I'm long-winded.
My father used to tell me when I was young, And coming up, he always say, son, the devil will tell you 90% of the truth just to tell you 10% of a lie.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to be able to pay attention. And that's where you were saying with the things that didn't they could identify with.
Yes.
Now it's a personal truth instead of an objective truth.
Yes. Yeah. It almost gives you the ability to excuse yourself from mistakes that you have made, because this is why I did that. You know what I'm saying? We oftentimes use the Willie Lynch letter as the reason why black female relationships don't survive. Historically, we don't start to see the single parent African American household become the majority until the 1950s. We use Africanisms like, oh, that's my play club cousin. Oh, that's my play daddy. Or if there's an older lady at work that kind of take care of you, that's my work mama. These are real things that we used.
My auntie.
Yeah. When your father was sold, somebody stepped up and filled in that role.
Right.
It may have been his wife's brother.
Right.
But we never were without male influence. And single parent households, and the single that has a lot to. That's a modern context,
right?
A modern experience. Just study history. Harriet Tubman. They will talk about their mothers and their fathers. What causes this, though? If you're going through it now, you automatically assume it must have been that way in 1712, when it wasn't. The welfare system. Right. They said you couldn't have a man in the house if you're going to accept this assistance.
Exactly.
So the man sometimes will willingly step back to say, hey, I'm just going to live across the street. Go read some of the narratives.
Or, because, see, I remember reading about that and studying that. They would go to the neighborhoods where there were black families and find those that was maybe not, all that happy in a situation.
Yes.
And encourage her to put abandonment charges on him.
Yes.
And he would then get arrested. And then if or when he made it out, she was moved out and had half his paycheck plus a stipend from the government and food coupons.
Absolutely.
And it like you say, it didn't come about as getting started rather until the 50s.
Yes.
And then by the time we made it to the 70s, we had complete complexes.
It's running amok now.
Now it's an easy way to get money, to live.
Yes.
And now the village concept no longer exists in the totality it used to.
Sure.
And now it's radical individualism.
Yes, sir. There were times when the welfare lady came over to check, the daddy hid in the closet because he ain't supposed to be there.
Right.
This is some of the reason for that. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. We know it's a problem. I saw a thing the other day is you make fun of me because I don't have a father, but you locked him up. You know where he at. Right. You throwing the stone and hiding your hand.
Right.
And we take this on. We accept this.
Right.
This is not a historical reality for us. It's a blip on the radar, right? But we must fix it. We can't use the Willie Lynch letter as an excuse for why it should live on.
Exactly.
Us not being able, our marriages not being able to survive. If you go back prior to 1968, black couples stayed together to death did them part. Even if one of them was stepping out on the other one, they made it work because the value system said,
right,
at least until these kids are grown, am I gonna go my separate way? What made this easier? What made this breakup easier? Ronald Reagan in 1969 signed the no-fault divorce law in California that quickly spread across the nation. You can get a divorce now because you don't like, hey, when I first met her, her eyes was green. I didn't know them was contacts. You know what I'm saying? And you can get a divorce. She might not like the way her husband played bingo. You can get a divorce for anything. These are sociological reasons for why we suffer what we suffer in a modern context, but don't blame it on it's an insult to your ancestors to say we went through such trivialities, because we didn't. And all you got to do is read Frederick Douglass, read Harriet Tubman. If you want the truth of what happened to us, look at historical things.
Right.
You don't need a made-up myth that can lead you in a totally wrong direction. You understand what I'm
So,
saying?
Sam, you mean to tell me that my first 2 divorces wasn't because of Willie Lynch?
No. And if you just read it today, hell no. but I don't know how much time we got.
You got a few minutes left. You got about 5 minutes.
Okay. I want anybody who has ever read this letter and took it literally not to think I'm beating up on you. Because I took it literally until I learned how to do primary research.
Exactly.
And when I first heard it, I was entering college. And as I'm in college, I would argue with people suffering from Willie Lynch syndrome.
Right.
Until I understood as a sociologist how to break things out. And I always knew when that man said refueling, something about that wasn't right. But I don't care. Willie Lynch was a real person. You can't tell me he wasn't. Right. You see what I'm saying? But when I was able to divorce my emotions, I could see it for what it is. I can tell you who wrote it. I can tell you when it first appeared on the scene and why everybody that you know would say the first time, if they of our age range, first time they heard it was in the 90s. 'Cause that's when they first put it out. Right. It took it about 20 years, pre-internet, for it to go around to where it comes to the attention of a librarian. You see what I'm saying? Right. But I do not want you to think I'm beating up on you. I do not want you to throw the merits of the letter away. Continue to use them. Just bury Willie Lynch.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad Ronald Reagan introduced that divorce thing, because you wouldn't have been able to divorce your emotions from.
Now we've done a lot of back and forth about this emotion thing.
Yep.
Checking emotion. And if we look around ourselves, we'll learn that if we learn to check our emotion,
true,
we can do so much more. We can be we can be greater than what we are.
Yeah, yeah.
But emotions is like a comfort zone. You know, the institutionalization, like jail, you do it so much, you get used to it. And when you get used to it, you very rarely travel outside of that circumference.
Yes, sir. Yes,
so
sir.
now this goes to show and repeats and confirms that regardless of your area, if you learn to control your emotion, you can do so much better. You can do so much more. You can be so much greater. But that is conquering that emotion.
Yeah. You can definitely think better when you're able to control your emotions, because emotions are real and they have their place.
That's right.
But out running amok, you're in trouble. You understand what I mean? And real quick, brother Brown, you're probably better at this. This good right here. Okay, yeah, this is the book that I was talking about from Dr. Pym. If you want to do any research on the Willie Lynch letter, as opposed to other books that you can get on it, which basically just gives you the 8-paragraph speech and the subsequent keys that he said he had in his bag, but he didn't mention, and somebody came behind and added them. Instead of just breaking those down, this book tells you who Dr. Asante is, why he did what he did. He's not a bad guy. It just kind of got away from him. Right. You understand what I'm saying? There's another book, Breaking the Curse of Willie Lynch, and it is written by Alvin Morrow. Also, if you want to know the truth about slavery and the diabolical things people did to us, go read somebody that you knew was a real person. You can document their lives. Read their writings, read what people wrote about them. I suggest, firstly, Before the Mayflower, A History of Black America by Lerone Bennett Jr., anything that he wrote on slavery.
He brought a grocery bag full of books.
Bear with me 1 minute. The Peculiar Institution, Slavery in the Antebellum South by Kenneth M. Stamp. Up from Slavery, Booker T. Washington, who has that's primary resource information because he was a slave. Right. So is this, the narrative of Frederick Douglass. These were slaves, and they will discuss their family structures. They will discuss how their heroes were older people. They will discuss their mother and their father. Or I've had 3 fathers because they kept getting sold, but somebody would step up and replace them. The Underground Railroad Records by William Steele. And Runaway Slaves, Rebels on the Plantation, John Hope Franklin, who was one of our great historians. And Trouble in Mind, Black Southerners in the Age of Jim Crow by Leon Lifwack. Now, the reason this is important, the reason I added this to it, is because many of the issues that we have as a people that are outlined in the Willie Lynch letter did not exist pre-Jim Crow. They were can all be attributed to a Jim Crow system. And if people don't know what actually Jim Crow is, the technical term would be the black codes. Once we were freed, we enjoyed a success as a people that we haven't had since. During Reconstruction, we got elected to office. We were senators, congressmen. We started some of our first black colleges, businesses. We became millionaires, and we were able to do it in a relative safety because the Union troops were protecting us while we was building this empire for about 15 and 20 years. The problem is the Union, the president at the time said, all right, they got it. They got it from here. They look like they're doing pretty good. This experiment worked. Once they pull the troops out, you leave us with the same damn people that enslaved us. So they start making laws. Right. They start saying, I don't give a damn if you can vote. You can't vote down here. You got to first count how many bubbles in a bar of soap. You got to read you got to memorize the Constitution and state it verbatim before you can vote. And before you know it, this group of quote unquote black laws becomes nicknamed Jim Crow because there was a white actor. In fact, the first ever movie star in American history, I can't remember the guy's name, but you know what? His name was Willie. So I do know a white man that was named Willie. But what he did was he would paint his face white. I mean, he would paint his face black. And he would act like a slave and make fun of himself. During the Reconstruction period, and it made white people feel better. They would go to these shows and feel good for an hour. Because I remember when we used to could do them like that. You understand? Probably the first time Let's Make America Great Again was ever uttered was at one of these live Jim Crow performances, right? The word Jim Crow comes from one of the first derogatory terms a black person was called was a crow. You black as a crow. A jimmy is something you use to pry something open. The crowbar comes from this. But the term Jim Crow illustrates a time period that some historians believe was worse than slavery. And a lot of the issues that we suffered, that the Willie Lynch letter attributes, gives a reason from, it ain't got nothing to do with slavery, got to do with Jim Crow time. That's just a little historical context. And a lot of the times you can tell what somebody hasn't read by what they believe in the face of clear mistakes that a historian like John Henry Clark would read a couple 2 of the 8 paragraphs, and before he could get to the 3rd, he threw the shit away. This ain't real. We missed that. What I know now is not what I knew then. Right. There's no embarrassment in buying that into that hook, line, and sinker 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The embarrassment would be if you still perpetuating it. And now that we know some of these things, you have an obligation to not only do better in your personal life, bury Willie Lynch, get rid of him. You don't need him to explain your problems away. Right. You can fix them. You can. If there is a Willie Lynch curse, we got the tools to break them. Definitely. You understand what I'm saying? And I hope I didn't make nobody mad with that. You understand? But
they'll be all right.
But I appreciate you, Brother JC, for coming through.
I appreciate you for inviting me.
I appreciate you, Brother Brown, for bearing with me. I know I'm too much to take sometimes. But in the words of a real historical figure that we ought to deify, Miss Harriet Tubman, we out.